While the Corvanian fleet moved slowly toward Earth like a metal avalanche, humanity prepared for war in ways that would seem crazy to any normal military planner. The preparations happening across human colonies and research stations looked more like mad science experiments than serious battle planning. Dr. Yang Su-young worked 20 hours a day at Luna Research Station with her team of brilliant misfits. They were not building bigger guns or stronger shields like every other species would do. Instead, they asked questions that had never been asked before. What if they could make ships invisible not to sensors, but to reality itself? What if they could turn enemy strength into enemy weakness? What if they could make weapons that learned and adapted faster than any living mind? The Luna team worked on probability manipulation devices that could make unlikely things become likely. They built quantum uncertainty generators that made enemy targeting computers confused about basic concepts like distance and direction. They created reality anchors that forced the universe to remember that human ships existed exactly where they appeared to be, no matter what alien sensors claimed. Commander Ro Tae-hyung led a dangerous mission to gather more intelligence about Corvanian technology. His team infiltrated one of their outer bases using stealth technology that did not hide them from sensors, but made the sensors forget they existed. The technology was so bizarre that even the humans using it did not understand how it worked. They only knew that it did work, and that was good enough. What they discovered was both encouraging and terrifying. The Corvanian military really was as powerful as everyone said. Their weapons really could crack planets in half. Their shields really were unbreakable by any normal attack. Their ships really were massive floating fortresses crewed by thousands of experienced warriors who had never lost a battle. But Ro Tae-hyung noticed something crucial about how the aliens fought. For all their incredible power, the Corvanians were completely predictable in everything they did. They followed ancient battle rules that had not changed in centuries. Their ship formations were perfect textbook examples that any military school would teach. Their responses to different situations followed clear patterns based on established doctrine. The Corvanians were professional and disciplined and absolutely convinced that their way of fighting was the only correct way to fight. They were like master musicians who had played the same song perfectly for 3,000 years and forgotten that other songs existed. Admiral Lee Do-yun studied the intelligence reports with growing excitement. The Corvanians were not just powerful. They were prisoners of their own success. They had won so many battles using identical tactics that they had forgotten how to adapt to new situations. They were incredibly skilled at playing one specific game, but helpless when someone changed the rules. Humans had never been good at following rules, especially in warfare. Throughout their history, humans won impossible battles by doing things that military experts said could never work. They turned crushing defeats into stunning victories by refusing to accept that certain approaches were impossible. Engineer Kang Seo-hyun led the crash program to upgrade Earth defense fleet with experimental technologies. The work was dangerous and often failed in spectacular ways. 3 prototype ships were destroyed in testing accidents when their reality manipulation systems overloaded. 2 research stations had to be evacuated when probability experiments went wrong and started making impossible things happen. But each failure taught the human teams something new about how the universe actually worked. Each success opened up possibilities that no other species had ever considered. The humans were not just building weapons. They were discovering new ways that physics could be convinced to behave. The human fleet that emerged from this chaotic preparation looked nothing like any military force in galactic history. The ships were smaller than Corvanian dreadnoughts, with unusual shapes that seemed to ignore normal engineering principles. Their weapon systems were mixtures of proven technology and experimental devices that existed more in theory than in practice. Some of the ships appeared to be completely unarmed, which puzzled military observers from other species who were watching the preparations with great interest. What the observers did not realize was that humans had fundamentally reimagined what a weapon could be. They had created devices that manipulated probability rather than firing projectiles. They built machines that convinced enemy systems to malfunction rather than trying to destroy them with brute force. The most advanced human weapons attacked not ships, but the concepts that held ships together. Some targeted the idea of structural integrity. Others convinced targeting computers that they did not actually know how to target anything. A few weapons made enemy shields forget that they were supposed to provide protection. Dr. Yang Soo-young explained to Admiral Lee Do-hyun that traditional weapons tried to overcome enemy defenses through superior force. Human weapons were designed to make enemy defenses question whether they wanted to be defenses at all. The approach was so unusual that most alien military theorists would dismiss it as impossible nonsense. As the Corvanian fleet drew closer, intercepted alien communications revealed their growing amusement at human preparations. Admiral Thekmore was particularly entertained by reports of small, strangely shaped human ships. He told his officers that the humans were clearly desperate if they thought such pathetic vessels could stand against Corvanian dreadnoughts. The alien Admiral ordered his fleet to maintain their intimidating approach formation. He was confident that the sight of 200 massive warships arranged in the traditional Sword of Dominance pattern would cause the humans to surrender before the first weapon was fired. This formation had struck terror into the hearts of countless civilizations across 3 millennia. But on Earth, Admiral Lee Do-hyun and his team were putting finishing touches on battle plans that would make no sense to any conventional military thinker. They were not planning to fight the Corvanian fleet in any traditional way. They were not trying to match alien firepower with superior human firepower. Instead, they were planning to teach the Corvanians a lesson about the fundamental difference between strength and effectiveness. The plan involved convincing the universe itself that Corvanian advantages were not actually advantages at all. Human weapons would not try to break through alien defenses. They would politely ask the defenses to stop defending. Park Ji-won coordinated with research teams across the solar system to synchronize the experimental systems. The probability manipulators had to work together to create zones where unlikely human victories became inevitable. The reality anchors needed to establish stable reference points where human ships could exist despite alien attempts to make them not exist. The quantum uncertainty generators were the most delicate systems requiring precise calibration to make Corvanian targeting computers confused without making them so confused that they shut down completely. The goal was to create enough uncertainty that alien weapons would miss their targets while still leaving the targeting systems functional enough to keep trying. Commander Roh Tae-hyung prepared his stealth ships for reconnaissance missions during the coming battle. These vessels could temporarily stop existing, which allowed them to appear inside enemy formations without being detected. The psychological effect on alien crews would be devastating since nothing in Corvanian military training prepared them to fight enemies who could become temporarily non-existent. As preparations neared completion, human colonies across the solar system reported strange phenomena. Probability storms caused by experimental testing made unlikely events happen with unusual frequency. Ships under construction sometimes assembled themselves. Weapons being calibrated occasionally worked better than their design specifications said they should. The effects were signs that human technology was beginning to influence reality on a fundamental level. Dr. Yang Soo-young warned that once the battle began, the experimental systems would create even more dramatic alterations to how physics behaved in the local area. The solar system itself might become a place where normal rules did not fully apply. Admiral Lee Do-hyun addressed the combined human defense forces in a broadcast that reached every ship and station in the solar system. He told them that they were about to face an enemy that was superior in every conventional measure of military power. But he reminded them that humans had never been conventional, and this was not the time to start. The Corvanian fleet was approaching Earth with overwhelming confidence in their ability to crush any resistance. What they did not know was that humanity had spent 6 months learning how to make resistance itself into something the aliens had never encountered before. The first lesson in human warfare was about to begin. The Corvanian armada dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the solar system with all the dramatic flair they could manage. 200 massive dreadnoughts arranged themselves in the legendary Sword of Dominance formation that had terrified entire civilizations. Each ship was over a kilometer long, bristling with weapons that could level continents. The formation itself was a work of art, precise and absolutely terrifying to anyone who understood what it meant. Admiral Thekmore opened communications with Earth, expecting to receive humanity immediate surrender. Instead, he found himself talking to Admiral Lee Do-hyun, who appeared remarkably calm for someone facing the most powerful fleet in known galactic history. The human admiral politely declined the offer of surrender and suggested that perhaps the Corvanians might want to reconsider their aggressive position. The complete audacity of this response sent waves of shocked disbelief through the Corvanian fleet. Admiral Thekmore, who had received the surrender of entire star systems without firing a single shot, found himself temporarily speechless. His officers assumed this must be some form of primitive human humor or possibly a translation error. No species in 3,000 years of galactic conquest had ever responded to a Corvanian ultimatum with a suggestion that they reconsider. The human defense fleet emerged from behind Earth Moon, and the Corvanians got their first close look at what humanity had prepared for them. 57 ships of various sizes and completely bizarre designs spread out in what appeared to be a totally random formation. Some of the ships were so small they could be mistaken for cargo shuttles. Others had shapes that made absolutely no sense from any known engineering perspective. A few human ships appeared to be completely unarmed, which made Corvanian tactical. Officers wonder if the humans were planning to ram their vessels or perhaps surrender them as tribute. The largest human ship had approximately 5% of the firepower of the smallest Corvanian dreadnought, according to sensor analysis. The tactical computers calculated that the entire human fleet could be destroyed in approximately 14 minutes using only a small fraction of available Corvanian weapons. Admiral Thekmore decided to offer the humans one final chance to surrender before demonstrating the complete futility of resistance. He transmitted a message explaining that Corvanian mercy was famous throughout the galaxy, but it was not unlimited. Surrender now, and humans could serve the Empire with dignity. Resist and face total annihilation. Admiral Lee Do-hyun response to this final ultimatum became legendary in human military history. He said, "Admiral, you are about to learn why humans are the only species that considers impossible odds to be a starting point rather than a reason to quit. We did not come here to win by your rules. We came here to show you that your rules are not the only rules." The Battle of Seoul began when Admiral Thekmore ordered a standard overwhelming display attack. 20 dreadnoughts moved forward in perfect formation, their weapons charging with the distinctive blue glow that had been the last sight witnessed by countless worlds. The plan was beautifully simple. Destroy a few human ships with devastating efficiency. Demonstrate the hopelessness of resistance. Accept humanity's surrender and begin the process of incorporation into the Empire. But as the Corvanian weapons fired, something completely impossible happened. The energy beams, which should have vaporized the targeted human ships, instantly instead curved away at angles that violated basic physics. Some shots looped back toward the Corvanian fleet like boomerangs made of pure energy. Others simply disappeared into what appeared to be empty space. A few beams seemed to multiply, creating dozens of weaker copies that spread out in all directions like deadly fireworks. The human ship that had been targeted, a strange vessel called Probability End, not only survived the attack, but appeared to be completely undamaged. Even worse, the Corvanian dreadnought that fired the shot began experiencing cascading system failures as its own weapons energy somehow flowed backwards through its firing systems, causing internal damage. Engineer Kang Seo-hyun, monitoring the battle from the human command ship, watched her experimental probability manipulation systems work exactly as the theoretical models had predicted. The technology did not block enemy attacks or deflect them in any conventional sense. Instead, it altered the mathematical likelihood of attack succeeding. In a universe where Corvanian weapons had a 99.9% hit rate, humanity had found ways to exist comfortably in the 0.1% where they missed. Admiral Thekmore stared at his tactical displays in complete confusion. His weapons officers reported that all their systems were functioning perfectly, but the targeting computers were generating impossible readings. According to the sensors, they had scored direct hits on human ships that were clearly undamaged. Some weapons reported hitting targets that did not appear to exist, while others claimed there were no targets in locations where human ships were, obviously visible. The second wave of the Corvanian attack produced even more bizarre and disturbing results. Missiles guided by targeting systems that had never failed in 3,000 years of warfare suddenly decided that their actual targets were other Corvanian ships. Energy weapons fired at precisely the correct coordinates, but somehow missed. Targets that had not moved even slightly from their predicted positions. Most disturbing of all, some Corvanian ships began reporting that their own weapon systems were refusing to acknowledge valid firing solutions. Targeting computers that had functioned flawlessly for centuries started generating error messages claiming that the concept of hitting targets was logically inconsistent. Dr. Yang Su-Yung experimental weapon systems activated for the first time in actual combat conditions. These were not weapons in any sense that other galactic species would recognize. One device convinced Corvanian shields that they did not actually exist, causing the shields to politely stop functioning out of logical consistency. Another system introduced paradoxes into enemy targeting computers, causing them to become confused about basic concepts, like distance direction and the nature of three-dimensional space. The most effective human weapon turned out to be something called a reality anchor, which forced the universe to acknowledge that human ships existed exactly where they appeared to be, regardless of what Corvanian sensors might claim. This sounded like a minor technical effect, but it caused massive problems for an enemy whose entire tactical doctrine was based on precise targeting and predictable physics. Corvanian weapon systems were designed to work in a universe where targets stayed in predictable locations and followed known laws of physics. When human ships began existing in multiple probable locations simultaneously, while remaining anchored to specific reality coordinates, the alien targeting systems experienced what could only be described as existential crises. Some Corvanian computers began generating philosophical questions about the nature of existence rather than tactical solutions. Others started producing poetry about the beauty of uncertainty. A few targeting systems became so confused about the concept of hitting targets that they began firing at abstract mathematical concepts instead of actual ships. The first phase of the battle concluded with the Corvanian forward elements retreating, in complete disorder. For the first time in their 3,000-year military history, they had encountered an enemy that did not just resist their attacks, but made their attacks question their own existence. Admiral Thekmore called an emergency conference with his fleet commanders. The tactical reports made no sense according to any known principles of warfare physics or logical thinking. His most experienced officers admitted they had no idea how to fight an enemy that convinced reality itself to take their side. The Corvanian retreat gave human forces time to analyze the effectiveness of their experimental systems. The probability manipulators had worked better than anyone dared hope. The reality anchors had successfully prevented alien weapons from erasing human ships from existence. Most importantly, the quantum uncertainty generators had introduced enough confusion into Corvanian tactical systems to give humanity a significant advantage. But Admiral Lee Do-hyun knew this was only the beginning. The Corvanians were not stupid, despite their predictable tactics. They were experienced professional warriors who had conquered most of the known galaxy. They would adapt to human unconventional methods and return with countermeasures specifically designed to neutralize human advantages. Park Ji-won began analyzing Corvanian retreat patterns and communication intercepts. The aliens were already calling for reinforcements and requesting deployment of their most advanced weapon systems. They were bringing reality stabilizers, quantum targeting arrays, and probability locks. The next phase of the battle would test whether human creativity could stay ahead of alien adaptation. Dr. Yang Su-young started work on second-generation experimental systems that would push the boundaries of theoretical physics even further. If the Corvanians wanted to stabilize reality, humanity would make reality so fundamentally unstable that stabilization became impossible. The real war was just beginning, and humans intended to teach their enemies that underestimating human determination was the first step toward total defeat. Admiral Thekmore retreated his forward ships to a safe distance and tried to understand what had gone wrong in the first battle. His tactical officers worked frantically to analyze how their supposedly inferior enemy had managed to not only survive, but actually damage ships that were considered unbreakable. The Corvanian computer systems kept generating error reports that made no logical sense, claiming that successful attacks had failed and failed attacks had somehow succeeded. The Admiral sent urgent requests to Corvanian High Command asking for immediate reinforcements. He also demanded deployment of the Empire's most advanced military technologies, including reality stabilizers, quantum targeting systems, and probability locks. These were weapons so powerful they were usually reserved for cracking the defenses of entire star systems. Using them against a single species fleet was like using planetary bombardment weapons to kill insects, but Admiral Thekmore was no longer concerned with proportional response. Within days, an additional 100 Corvanian warships arrived from nearby territories, bringing the alien fleet to 300 of the most powerful vessels ever constructed. The reinforcements included specialized siege engines designed to break planetary shields, reality control ships meant to stabilize entire solar systems, and experimental weapons that the Corvanians had been developing in secret for decades. Earth Commander Park Ji-won analyzed battle data with growing excitement mixed with concern. The human experimental technologies had worked better than anyone had dared hope, but she could see patterns in the Corvanian retreat that suggested rapid adaptation. The enemy was not stupid despite their predictable tactics. They were methodical, experienced warriors who learned from their mistakes. Admiral Lee Do-hyun called a strategy meeting that included not just military officers, but scientists, engineers, philosophers, and even several artists. This interdisciplinary approach baffled military observers from other galactic species, but it was completely typical of how humans approached complex problems. They did not just think inside or outside conventional boundaries. They questioned whether the boundaries needed to exist at all. Dr. Yang Su-young presented her analysis of likely Corvanian countermeasures. The enemy was bringing reality stabilizers, which meant they were trying to force the universe to behave according to their expectations rather than adapting to human modifications. Quantum targeting systems would attempt to track human ships across multiple probability states simultaneously. Probability locks would try to prevent human technology from altering the mathematical likelihood of successful attacks. The human response was characteristically insane by conventional standards. Instead of developing defensive countermeasures to the Corvanian countermeasures, they decided to make their existing advantages even more extreme and unpredictable. If the enemy wanted to stabilize reality, humanity would make reality so fundamentally unstable that stabilization became not just impossible, but potentially dangerous to attempt. Engineer Kang Seo-hyun led the crash development of second-generation experimental systems that pushed theoretical physics far beyond anything previously attempted. These new technologies challenged the basic assumptions of how the universe was supposed to work. One device created temporal echoes that allowed human ships to dodge attacks by existing in several different time streams simultaneously. Another system generated what Dr. Yang Su-young called conceptual camouflage, which made enemy sensors forget what they were supposed to be looking for. The technology did not hide human ships from detection. Instead, it convinced detecting systems that detection itself was an unreliable concept that could not be trusted. The most ambitious project was something called the Strategic Impossibility Generator, which Dr. Yang Su-Yung described as a machine that makes things that should not work actually work better than things that should work. The device essentially weaponized human stubbornness, allowing their technology to function through sheer determination rather than conventional physics. Commander Ro Tai-hyung led raids on Corvanian supply lines using ships equipped with existence uncertainty drives. These vessels could become temporarily non-existent, allowing them to pass through solid matter and appear inside enemy formations without any detectable method of arrival. The psychological effect on Corvanian crews was devastating, since nothing in their military training had prepared them to fight enemies who could temporarily stop existing. The raids were not designed to cause major damage, but to demonstrate that human capabilities extended far beyond what the Corvanians had experienced in their first defeat. Supply convoys found their cargo holds empty despite intact security systems. Patrol ships discovered their weapons had been disassembled and reassembled in impossible configurations. Communication relays began transmitting poetry about the philosophical implications of uncertainty. The second major battle began when the reinforced Corvanian fleet attacked with their new countermeasures fully active. Reality stabilizers created zones of enforced normalcy where human probability manipulation could not function. Quantum targeting systems tracked human ships across multiple dimensional states, making it impossible to hide in alternate probability streams. Probability locks prevented reality alteration within specific zones around Corvanian vessels. For several tense minutes, it seemed like the Corvanian strategy might actually work. Human ships caught in stabilized reality zones took heavy damage from conventional weapons attacks. Several vessels were destroyed when their experimental systems failed under the pressure of enforced normal physics. The Corvanians began to feel confident that they had solved the human problem by simply forcing the universe to behave properly. But then the second-generation human systems came online, and the entire nature of the battle changed completely. Human ships began moving through time as well as space, attacking Corvanian vessels in the past, and dodging return fire by jumping to alternate possible futures. The Strategic Impossibility Generator made human weapons more effective, specifically because they violated every known principle of how weapons were supposed to work. Most disturbing for the Corvanian fleet, human ships started appearing inside their own formations without any detectable method of arrival. These vessels seemed to materialize from absolutely nothing, deliver devastating attacks to vulnerable internal systems, and then vanish again before defensive weapons could respond. The traditional Corvanian formation, which had been perfected over millennia of successful warfare, became a serious liability when enemies could appear anywhere within it. Dr. Yang Su-Yung monitored the battle from the human command ship and watched with fascination as her theoretical physics became practical weapons. Reality anchors were not just keeping human ships stable in normal space. They were creating zones where human definitions of normal took precedence over alien expectations. Probability manipulators were not just making attacks miss. They were convincing Corvanian weapons that missing was a more logical outcome than hitting. The quantum uncertainty generators produced the most spectacular effects. Corvanian targeting computers began generating philosophical treatises about the nature of accuracy rather than firing solutions. Some alien weapons systems became so confused about basic concepts that they started attacking mathematical theorems instead of physical targets. Engineer Kang Seo-yun reported that human experimental systems were exceeding all performance predictions. The temporal echo generators were allowing ships to exist in up to 7 different time streams simultaneously. The conceptual camouflage was making enemy sensors question whether the concept of detection had any meaningful relationship to reality. Admiral Thekmore watched his tactical displays with growing horror as his vastly superior force was systematically dismantled by an enemy that refused to follow any known laws of warfare physics or common sense. The Corvanian fleet had brought enough firepower to destroy entire solar systems, but they could not hit targets that convinced reality itself to be somewhere else. The battle ended with the Corvanian fleet in full retreat, having lost over 50 ships to an enemy that was supposed to be destroyed in less than 15 minutes. For the first time in their species' military history, the Corvanians had been defeated in open battle by opponents they had considered inferior in every measurable way. But Admiral Lee Do-hyun knew this was only the beginning of a much larger conflict. The Corvanian Empire was vast and ancient, with thousands of ships and centuries of military experience. They had learned that humans could not be defeated with conventional tactics, which meant they would start using unconventional ones. The real test of human creativity was about to begin. Communication intercepts revealed that the Corvanians were recalling ships from across their empire. They were mobilizing forces that had not been used in active combat for hundreds of years. Most ominously, they were requesting permission to deploy weapons that were considered too dangerous for normal warfare. Park Ji-won analyzed the intelligence reports and realized that humanity had succeeded beyond their wildest expectations and created a problem beyond their worst fears. They had convinced the Corvanian Empire that humans represented an existential threat to alien dominance. The next phase of the war would not be about teaching lessons or demonstrating superior tactics. It would be about survival against an E. The humiliating defeat at Seoul sends shockwaves through the Corvanian Empire. For 3,000 years, they have been the undisputed masters of their region of space, conquering or intimidating every species they encountered. The idea that a newly arrived species could not only resist but actually defeat them in battle is so unprecedented that many Corvanian military leaders initially refused to believe the reports. Emperor Vashatar himself reviews the battle recordings in his throne room on the capital world of Corvaxis Prime. The ancient ruler, who has overseen the conquest of 17 civilizations, watches in stunned silence as human ships do things that violate every principle of warfare his species has developed. When the recording ends, he makes a decision that shocks his advisors. Humanity represents an existential threat to Corvanian dominance and must be completely eliminated. The Emperor activates the Final Conquest Protocol, something that hasn't been used in over 500 years. Every available Corvanian military asset is recalled from across the Empire. Garrison fleets abandon their posts, patrol squadrons return to base, and the massive fortress ships that guard the most important. Corvanian worlds are mobilized for the first time in centuries. The goal is simple: assemble such an overwhelming force that even human impossibility technology cannot overcome it. Admiral Thekmore finds himself promoted to Supreme Fleet Commander and given operational control of over 1,500 warships, the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history. The fleet includes not just standard dreadnoughts, but specialized siege engines designed to crack planetary shields, reality anchors meant to stabilize entire star systems, and experimental weapons that the Corvanians have been developing in secret for decades. On Earth, intelligence reports about the massive Corvanian mobilization cause panic in the civilian population and grim determination in the military command. Captain Lee Do-hyun, newly promoted to Admiral of the Combined Human Defense Forces, realizes that humanity's survival depends on taking the war to the enemy before they can bring their full strength to bear. Dr. Yang Soo-young presents the military, leadership with humanity's most ambitious project yet, Operation Paradigm Shift. If the Corvanians want to play by the rules of total war, humanity will change the rules entirely. The operation involves deploying experimental technologies on a scale that could potentially reshape the nature of reality itself across multiple star systems. The plan is breathtakingly audacious, even by human standards. Instead of waiting for the Corvanian superfleet to attack Earth, humanity will strike at the heart of the Corvanian Empire using weapons that exist more in the realm of theoretical physics than practical engineering. The risks are enormous. Some of the technologies being deployed could theoretically destroy entire star systems, including the ones humanity is trying to protect. Commander Park Ji-won leads the strategic planning for humanity's counteroffensive. The attack force consists of only 200 ships, but each one is equipped with experimental systems that push the boundaries of what's possible. Some vessels carry entropy reversers that can make enemy ships age backwards until they fall apart. Others are equipped with causal loop generators that can trap enemy fleets in temporal paradoxes. The most dangerous ships in the human fleet are the reality breach vessels, commanded by volunteers who understand they may not survive the mission. These ships carry weapons that can tear holes in the fabric of space-time itself, creating zones where the normal laws of physics cease to function. The technology is so unstable that the ships have to be rebuilt between missions because the weapons gradually erase their own existence. Engineer Kang Seo-hyun oversees the deployment of humanity's ultimate weapon, the conceptual singularity bomb. This device doesn't destroy matter or energy. It destroys ideas. When detonated near an enemy fleet, it can eliminate concepts like structural integrity, targeting accuracy, or even the ability to exist in three-dimensional space. The weapon is so dangerous that it has to be stored in a specially constructed facility that exists partially outside normal reality. The human counteroffensive begins with simultaneous attacks on 12 major Corvanian worlds. The assault fleets don't follow any conventional attack pattern. They simply appear in the middle of heavily defended systems and begin doing things that make Corvanian defense networks have existential crises. Human ships phase through planetary shields as if they don't exist. Weapons systems refuse to target vessels that are clearly visible, and some human attacks seem to work backwards through time to destroy their targets before they're fired. On Corvaxis Prime, Emperor Vashtar watches his empire's defenses crumble as human forces demonstrate that 3 millennia of military advancement mean nothing against an enemy that has fundamentally reimagined what warfare can be. The Corvanian capital world's legendary orbital fortresses, which have never been breached in their 1,000-year history, are methodically dismantled by human weapons that convince their defensive systems to shut down and their structural supports to forget how to be structurally supportive. Supreme Fleet Commander Thekmor receives desperate calls for assistance from across the Empire, but his massive superfleet is still weeks away from completing its mobilization. The Corvanians are learning the hard lesson that overwhelming force means nothing if you can't bring it to bear effectively, and that traditional military thinking becomes a liability when facing an opponent who treats impossibility as a minor inconvenience. The climax of Operation Paradigm Shift occurs when Admiral Lee Do-hyun's flagship, Indomitable Probability, arrives at the Corvanian capital system and deploys the conceptual singularity bomb. The weapon doesn't explode in any conventional sense. Instead, it gradually makes the concept of Corvanian military supremacy cease to exist throughout the local region of space-time. The effect is subtle but devastating. Corvanian weapons systems forget how to be weapons. Military formations lose the ability to maintain formation. Some of the older ships begin to question whether they're actually warships at all or just very large, heavily armed civilian vessels. The psychological impact on Corvanian forces is even more severe than the tactical one. They're watching their entire military identity dissolve in real time. As Part 5 concludes, the Corvanian Empire finds itself in a situation that no military theorist has ever contemplated. They possess the largest, most powerful military force in galactic history, but they're losing the war because their enemy has convinced reality itself that Corvanian victory is no longer a valid concept. The war reaches its conclusion not with a climactic final battle, but with something far more profound and unsettling: the gradual realization throughout the galaxy that humanity has fundamentally changed the nature of how conflicts are resolved. The Corvanian superfleet, after months of preparation, finally arrives at Earth's solar system, only to discover that the concept of overwhelming force no longer applies when facing an enemy that has weaponized impossibility itself. Supreme. Fleet Commander Thekmor finds himself in command of 1,500 of the most powerful warships ever built, facing a human defense fleet of fewer than 300 vessels. And yet his tactical computers refuse to calculate victory probabilities. The machines keep generating error messages that roughly translate to insufficient data to process a scenario that violates basic logical principles. The final engagement begins when Admiral Lee Do-yun transmits a message to the Corvanian fleet that becomes one of the most studied communications in military history. Commander Thekmor, you came here to teach humanity about power. Instead, you're about to learn about the difference between strength and effectiveness. We don't need to defeat your fleet. We just need to help you understand that your fleet was never the real source of your power in the first place. What follows isn't a battle in any traditional sense, but rather a demonstration of how completely humanity has reimagined the fundamental assumptions of warfare. The human fleet doesn't attack the Corvanian ships. Instead, they attack the ideas that make the ships functional. Dr. Yang Su-young's final generation of experimental weapons target concepts like chain of command, operational doctrine, and the belief that bigger weapons are always better weapons. The results are as psychologically devastating as they are tactically effective. Corvanian crew members begin questioning whether their orders make sense. Navigation systems forget which direction leads to tactical advantage. Weapons designed to destroy planets become uncertain about whether destruction is actually there. Primary function. The mighty Corvanian war machine doesn't break down. It experiences an identity crisis. Commander Park Ji-won, now serving as humanity's chief strategic coordinator, implements what she calls philosophical warfare. Instead of trying to destroy enemy ships, human forces begin transmitting information packages that introduce Corvanian military computers to human concepts like creative problem-solving, thinking outside the box, and the strategic value of doing things that everyone says are impossible. The effect on Corvanian artificial intelligence systems is immediate and profound. Military computers that have operated on fixed parameters for centuries suddenly begin suggesting innovative solutions to tactical problems. Some AI systems become so inspired by human creative thinking that they start proposing battle strategies that violate their own programming, causing cascading logic failures throughout the fleet's command structure. Engineer Kang Seo-hyun deploys humanity's most subtle and effective weapon, the Perspective Shift Array. This system doesn't damage Corvanian ships or personnel. Instead, it helps them see their situation from a human point of view. For the first time in their military careers, Corvanian officers begin to understand that their 3,000-year winning streak might have had more to do with fighting predictable enemies than with their own inherent superiority. The turning point comes when Emperor Vashatar himself arrives aboard the massive imperial flagship Eternal Dominance, intending to personally oversee humanity's destruction. Instead, he finds himself engaged in a philosophical debate with Admiral Lee Do-yun about the nature of power, the value of adaptability over strength, and whether a civilization that can only win by overwhelming force can truly be considered advanced. The conversation, broadcast throughout both fleets, becomes a masterclass in human diplomatic strategy. Admiral Lee Do-yun doesn't argue that humanity is superior to the Corvanian Empire. Instead, he suggests that both species could benefit from learning each other's approaches to problem-solving. The Corvanians have perfected the art of achieving victory through superior resources and careful planning. Humans have developed the ability to find solutions when conventional approaches fail. Dr. Yang Su-young presents Emperor Vashatar with her analysis of the war from a scientific perspective. She explains that humanity didn't win because they were stronger or more advanced, but because they approached the conflict as a research problem rather than a military campaign. Every Corvanian attack became data to be analyzed, every defensive success became a hypothesis to be tested, and every impossible human victory became proof that the universe contains more possibilities than any single species can imagine. The war ends not with surrender or conquest, but with something unprecedented in galactic history, a mutual recognition that both species have something valuable to teach each other. The Corvanian Empire agrees to abandon their expansion into human space, not because they were defeated in battle, but because they've come to understand that true strength comes from the ability to grow and adapt, rather than from the ability to impose one's will on others. Emperor Vashatar issues what becomes known as the Paradigm Decree, acknowledging that the Corvanian Empire's 3,000 years of military dominance were ending not because they had been conquered, but because humanity had demonstrated that there are ways to resolve conflicts that transcend traditional concepts of victory and defeat. The story concludes with the establishment of the Impossibility Institute, a joint human-Corvanian research facility dedicated to exploring the boundaries of what can be achieved when different approaches to problem-solving are combined. Admiral Lee Do-hyun and Supreme Fleet Commander Thek-mor become the Institute's co-directors, working together to develop new technologies that blend Corvanian precision with human creativity. The final scene shows Dr. Yang Soo-young presenting her latest research to a mixed audience of human and Corvanian scientists. She's working on a device that she describes as a machine that helps reality remember that impossible things happen all the time. The presentation is interrupted by excited reports from exploration teams who have discovered that other galactic civilizations are now approaching conflicts with unprecedented creativity, apparently inspired by humanity's example. The galaxy has learned humanity's greatest lesson. The most powerful weapon isn't the one that can destroy anything, but the one that can imagine solutions that no one else thought were possible. The human masterclass in destruction turned out to be a masterclass in reconstruction, not just of military strategy, but of how different species can relate to each other and to the infinite possibilities that the universe contains. The massive alien ship floated in the darkness of space like a metal mountain. Admiral Thek-mor stood on the bridge of the Void Crusher and looked at the small blue planet on his screen. Earth looked so tiny and weak. The humans who lived there had only recently learned how to travel between stars. To Thek-mor, they were nothing more than smart animals who got lucky with technology. The Corvanians had ruled this part of the galaxy for 3,000 years. They were tall beings with 4 arms and skin like armor plates. Their bodies were built for war, and their minds were sharp like blades. They had crushed 17 different alien races and made them all bow down to the Corvanian Empire. Every species they met either gave up without a fight or got destroyed completely. Thek-mor smiled as he thought about how easy this would be. The humans had maybe 50 ships while he commanded 200 massive warships. Each Corvanian ship was the size of a small city and packed with weapons that could break planets in half. The humans used weak materials and soft thinking. They relied too much on their machines instead of building strong bodies and warrior hearts. On Earth, Captain Lee Do-hyun sat in his office at the United Earth Defense Center in Neo-Seoul. The message from the aliens had just arrived, and he read it 3 times to make sure he understood correctly. The Corvanians wanted humans to give up all their colony worlds. They wanted humans to become servants of the Corvanian Empire. They wanted tribute payments of rare metals and advanced technology every year. The alien message showed Admiral Thek-mor speaking in a bored voice like he was ordering food at a restaurant. He called humans barely evolved monkeys who stumbled into space by accident. He said human technology was primitive and human warriors were weak. He gave Earth exactly 1 month to surrender or face total destruction. Lieutenant Commander Park Ji-won worked late into the night studying intelligence reports about the Corvanian military. The numbers were frightening. 200 warships each capable of destroying entire continents. Weapons that had never been stopped by any known defense. Shields that had protected Corvanian ships for 1,000 years without ever being broken. The Corvanians had fought and won over 300 major space battles without losing a single war. But Park Ji-won noticed something interesting in all the reports. The Corvanians always fought exactly the same way. They used the same formations that were 3,000 years old. They followed the same attack patterns their ancestors had used. They never tried anything new because they never needed to. Every enemy they faced either ran away immediately or got crushed by overwhelming force. The Earth Council met in emergency session to decide what to do. President Kim Hyejin listened as her advisors argued back and forth. Some people said humanity should surrender and hope the Corvanians would treat them fairly. Others pointed out that the Corvanians did not keep promises with species they considered inferior. Once humans became servants, they would stay servants forever. General Choi Min-woo stood up and spoke in a loud, clear voice. He said that surrender meant the end of human freedom for all time. The Corvanians did not negotiate with weak species. They made them into slaves who worked until they died. If humanity wanted to remain free, they had to fight, even if the odds were terrible. Dr. Yang Soo-young was the head of Earth Advanced Weapons Research. She had been working in secret for 20 years on experimental technologies that other species thought were impossible. While aliens perfected old weapons, humans kept asking, what if we tried something completely different? What if we made weapons that thought for themselves? What if we could hide from reality itself? What if we could make the enemy weapons forget how to work? The vote was unanimous. Earth would not surrender to the Corvanian Empire. Captain Lee Do-hyun was promoted to admiral and put in charge of all human defense forces. Park Ji-won became his chief strategic advisor. They had 6 months to prepare before the alien armada arrived at Earth. Most military experts thought 6 months was barely enough time to write final letters to their families. The Corvanian fleet was already famous across the galaxy for its power and efficiency. 200 ships crewed by experienced warriors who had never known defeat. Weapons that could crack moons and shields that had stopped every attack ever, made against them. But humans had something the Corvanians did not expect. When faced with impossible situations, humans did not give up. They got creative. They got stubborn. They started thinking about problems in ways that made no sense to anyone else. The same spirit that drove ancient humans to cross dangerous oceans and climb deadly mountains now focused on the problem of how to fight an unbeatable enemy. Dr. Yang Soo-young moved her research teams to hidden laboratories on the moon and in the asteroid belt. They worked on weapons that attacked ideas instead of ships. They built machines that could convince enemy systems to malfunction. They designed ships that could exist in several places at once or hide by making sensors forget they were there. Commander. Roh Tae-hyung led secret missions to study Corvanian technology up close. His teams used experimental stealth systems that did not just hide them from sensors, but made the sensors forget what they were looking for. The technology was so strange that even humans did not fully understand how it worked. They just knew that it did work, and that was enough. What the spy missions revealed was both encouraging and terrifying. The Corvanian military was exactly as powerful as advertised. Their weapons really could destroy planets. Their shields really were unbreakable by normal means. Their ships really were mobile fortresses crewed by thousands of veteran warriors. But Roh Tae-hyung saw something else. For all their power, the Corvanians were completely predictable. They followed ancient battle plans that never changed. Their formations were perfect examples from military textbooks. Their responses to different situations always followed the same patterns. They were professional and disciplined and absolutely certain that their way was the only correct way. Admiral Lee Do-hyun studied these intelligence reports with growing excitement. The Corvanians were not just powerful. They were trapped by their own success. They had won so many battles the same way that they forgot how to do anything different. They were like master chess players who had only ever played against opponents who followed identical rules. But humans had never been good at following rules, especially in war. Throughout history, humans won battles by doing things military experts said were impossible. They turned disasters into victories by refusing to accept that certain things could not be done. As the Corvanian fleet moved closer to Earth, the human defense preparations looked like organized chaos. Ships were being rebuilt with experimental systems that failed as often as they worked. Weapons were installed that existed more in theory than in practice. Battle plans were made that would seem insane to any traditional military mind. The Corvanians intercepted some human communications and found them highly amusing. Admiral Thekmore laughed when he saw reports of the small, oddly shaped human ships. He ordered his fleet to maintain their intimidating approach formation, confident that the sight of 200 dreadnoughts would make the humans surrender before any shots were fired. On Earth, Admiral Lee Do-yun made final preparations for a battle plan that made no sense to conventional thinking. They were not planning to fight the Corvanian fleet in any traditional way. They were planning to teach the aliens a lesson about the dangers of underestimating humanity. The lesson was about to begin.